This is the kickoff event for the Spirituality Mind-Body Institute and the Mindfulness and Education Working Group. We're two organizations at the school that promote a variety of spirituality and mind-body initiatives. And I'd like to introduce to you Pandit, who's a dear friend of mine, a fellow journeyer, and also a wonderful teacher. He's been a part of the Columbia community for at least a decade, right? And I think that's longer than I've been in many places, so it's quite a testament. He's Hindu chaplain. He also teaches at Union Theological. He taught a course here as well, and provides a variety of activities here. So we invited him here to share his book, which is a story. It's an autobiography of his life as an urban monk and some of the events that came up along the way. So without further ado, Pandit.
Thank you very much, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here and to be able to share some of my journey with all of you. So the way I'll do it is I'll read certain excerpts from the book and then talk about it and explain them, and then we'll open it up to some questions from all of you. See what you'd like to ask me. I'll go ahead and start reading from chapter 2, page 12. This will give you an idea, building up to what I'm doing now and why I'm doing what I'm doing now. One of my dad's first business ventures, after coming to the United States, was an Indian furniture store in Los Angeles. It didn't last long and had to close down. That business swallowed up whatever little money my parents came to this country with. For the next couple of years, they would find and set up booths at different flea markets and swap meets. They would load up our 1972 silver station wagon with all kinds of stuff, jewelry, clothing, and decorative items from local wholesalers and sell them at different flea markets around the city. Eventually, they found out about the boardwalk on Venice Beach and rented a space there. They sold all kinds of gifts and jewelry items, Indian brass figures and carvings, sunglasses, gold-plated jewelry, and even clothing. Our booth was right across the basketball courts where the movie White Men Can't Jump was filmed, and just a few steps away from Gold's Gym. So we were in a very popular location. I would go to the basketball courts and shoot around with the guys. They looked really huge to me because I couldn't have been more than 9 or 10 years old. But they were really nice and welcomed me in. I would even refer to them as uncle, because in India, out of respect, you're supposed to refer to all adults as uncle or auntie. These are complete strangers, of course. I spent my time playing basketball, swimming in the ocean, and riding my roller skates up and down the boardwalk. Venice Beach turned out to be a very successful business venture for my parents. And it did so well that my parents acquired a booth, second booth, a quarter-mile down. It might have been these early years on the beach that developed my love for the ocean. That love only increased as I went beyond just swimming, body surfing, the Southern California waves, and started boogie boarding. Although later in high school, my friends and I were never much for surfing, we took boogie boarding very seriously. So that's a little introduction to our first couple of years in this country. We came to this country in 1980 from India. My parents moved to Los Angeles. And they were setting up shop at Venice Beach. And this is how I spent my early years, playing basketball. And because at Venice Beach, I was playing basketball with a lot of African American people, the music I was listening to was hip hop, soul, rap. Some of the early songs in my mind were that of Rick James and Super Freak and Give It To Me Babe and all these things. Of course, as an 8-year-old, I had no clue what he was talking about. And my parents' English wasn't good enough to understand what he was talking about, thankfully. But that's what was playing in our station wagon, believe it or not, when we were driving home. So that's a little intro to the first couple of years. So now this is as I'm in school. Now we've moved, by this time we're living in Glendale, California, which is a little north of Los Angeles. My nationality, skin color, and religion were different from those of other kids growing up in Glendale. Even the Indian food my mom packed wasn't the same as what everyone else was eating. I quickly switched to peanut butter and jelly or other types of sandwiches to try to fit in. I hesitated to invite my friends over to my house because I was embarrassed about how un-American we were. My parents played Hindi songs and watched Bollywood movies. More than that, our altar of worship had so many gods. Some gods had multiple hands and heads, while others were half human, half animal. I felt certain that I couldn't explain the foreign nature of the sights and sounds to my friends. I would become the laughing stock of the school if the word got out. I suppose the bicultural experience could have been a lot easier if we had lived in Cerritos with other Indians. So this is still in the early 80s. For the most part, Indian culture was very foreign to the American public. Although I was happy about the awareness the 1982 movie Gandhi raised about India and its struggle for independence, I wasn't thrilled when other kids referred to me as, "Hey Gandhi." They obviously weren't attempting to glorify me. Once, as I was walking out of my 5th grade math class, a kid I didn't get along with called me Gandhi one too many times. I just wasn't able to tolerate it, and right in class we got into a fight, and somehow I ended up punching him in the face. Not very Gandhi-like of me. We both got sent to the principal's office. While we were sitting there waiting to talk to the principal, he turned to me and said, "Nice shot." I think most Indian kids and perhaps other Asians who grew up in the 80s and 90s had a similar identity struggle. We all wanted to be American. We tried to dress like Americans, talk like Americans, listen to American music and eat American food, but we still felt there was something different about us. By the time I was 10 years old, I had already had a wide variety of life experiences that singled me out from my peers and distanced me from my home country. My identity splintered in two as I strove to be cool around my American friends and well-behaved for my parents. So a little more about my experiences in school and how, I'm sure for the most part of the planet, really enjoyed and appreciated the movie Gandhi. It had a different impact for me because I was the only Indian kid in school. Okay, so now I'd like to read to another section, more about the things that led me to a monastic life. So now I'm going to read from chapter 5. This chapter is called The Monks of Mumbai. So I give a bit of a recap here. So I'll read that. I knew something had to change, but I had no clue what I should do. Our family's financial situation was still very precarious. We had still not recovered from the collapse of our family fortunes in Los Angeles. One day, as I was sitting in the New York temple, looking up at the altar in a mood of desperation, I prayed for something to happen, and something did. The temple president announced that a trip was being organized for those interested in going to visit some of the holy places in India. Right then and there, I knew instantly this is what I had to do. I had to go to India. I desperately wanted to get away from my job, the depressing situation at my home, and the intensely materialistic environment of America. Deep down inside, I knew this was the answer, and I had to follow this calling. So I'm about 27 years old at this point. We jumped about 19 years. Okay, just thought I'd let you know that. I felt as if God had heard my prayers and was giving me the much-needed direction. Given me the much-needed direction I'd been looking for. Not too long after that, my father succeeded in some of his business deals and was able to maintain the household affairs on his own. At this time, I knew that I could quit my job if I wanted to and perhaps go to India. But seeing my father's business succeed, I was tempted to join him and treat myself right for a change. After all, I had experienced pretty serious financial and emotional hardships for almost 8 years since I had left Los Angeles. There was a voice within me saying that this was the small window that had opened up to pursue my spiritual life, and that if I didn't jump through that window and go to India, that window might close and not open up again. I kept remembering how everything I had owned had been stripped away from me by the forces of time and karma, and how my possessions had never really satisfied me in the first place. Did I once again want to try to enjoy something temporary and material? The decision to go to India wasn't as easy as I had thought it would be. The thought of living in a communal setting made me anxious. I'm an only child and have always had my own room, TV, stereo, bathroom, car, and parking space. I never really had to share anything with anyone and had always been able to do what I wanted, when I wanted, and how I wanted. This was definitely something I had to seriously consider. But there wasn't much else holding me back. My parents were supportive and didn't raise any emotional roadblocks. Internally, I can't say I knew what they were going through, but I knew I had to go no matter what. So I'm hoping that gave a brief introduction into who I am and a build up to me just on the cusp of making a decision of whether or not I should go to India and live in a monastery. I was 27 at that time. It was 1999. I'm sure you're all trying to do the math right now. I'll let you go ahead and figure it out for yourselves. It's a little bit more fun that way. So people are always asking me, a question that I always get asked, everywhere I go pretty much, is what made you want to become a monk? That's what people are always asking me. Because I guess it's not very often that you have a chance to, or you just meet somebody who happens to be a monk. So naturally, I don't know how many times anyone in this room is, it's not like on your regular, everyday interactions, you're just running across people who are monks. So when I come across people, I meet people, that's one thing that immediately, so what made you want to become a monk? And that's part of the reason that I wrote this book, actually. The main reason I wrote this book, I started writing it not with the intention of publishing it. I started writing it as a journal, as a reflection into my own life. Because by the time I moved into the monastery, I had lived in 3 different countries. I had lived in India, America, Bulgaria, which is in East Europe, and back to America. The Bulgaria part I skipped. We'll leave that for you to read. And I'd probably lived in we'd moved about 15 or 16 times in 27 years. Lived in that many different locations, or apartments or houses. So I thought it was important that I take inventory into my own life and really answer the question for myself, why did I become a monk? And as the Hindu chaplain at Columbia, what I do a lot is talk to people and help people with the challenge that they're going through. And as I was doing that, I thought, I should take some time out for my own self and really figure out how all of the moving and all of the things that happened in my life, how did they affect me? And how did they really make me want to become a monk? So the writing process started about 2 years ago, where I just started as a reflection. That was it. At that time, there was no intention or idea that, someday maybe it'll get published. And then as people were asking me why I became a monk, I started enhancing the story in that, just adding more detail, that in case it ever gets published, I can thoroughly answer this question for people, and that it's not just an answer for me. So the seed somehow was being planted that maybe one day it could be published, and this way I can fully answer the question for people. So it was actually at the request of a person who met me at a lecture like this, who wanted to talk to me, who suggested that you really should try and publish your story. And she didn't even know I had anything written. I said, well, I only have a journal. And she insisted on seeing it, which I refused because it was personal. I said, no, it's my journal. She really insisted. And I showed it to her, and she really loved it. I said, okay, I'm not convinced. But that's where actually the process started about a year ago, that I started to really think about publishing it and putting in more information that would be helpful. So the book will take you all on a journey from my upbringing in this country, the challenges that I go through in this country as an only child, and as an only Indian, as an only Hindu in my part of town in Los Angeles, as I move around. And then the book, of course, as I was making the decision to become a monk, I was reading very seriously the prominent Hindu text called the Bhagavad Gita, which literally means a song of God. So a lot of wisdom from the Gita that affected me in a very, very positive and very, very profound manner during this turbulent time in my life. I share a lot of that wisdom, and how that wisdom helped me deal with the financial losses that we incurred, the constant uprooting experience that I was experiencing. And the wisdom of that, the same wisdom that helped me, how I share that in interactions that I have with people at Columbia, or lectures that I give around the tri-state area or around the country. So I'd like to read one more passage in which I've become a monk now. The passage I'm going to read, I'm a monk. And it's an interaction that I have with one individual. So I'm going to just look that up here. So this is chapter 13. The chapter is called Mortality and Transcendence. And the subsection of the chapter that I'm going to be reading is called Remembering the Departed. A Columbia University alum who had been regularly attending my Gita discussions introduced me to one of her friends while visiting my temple. So at Columbia, I was doing vegetarian cooking classes and discussions on the Bhagavad Gita. So this was a person who was attending my sessions. She introduced me to one of her friends while visiting my temple. She mentioned that her friend is going through a lot and that it would be nice if I could speak with her. I shook hands with her friend, gave her my email address, and told her to reach out to me. Sure enough, a few days later, she emailed me requesting to meet. It was during the winter months, and conditions were blizzard-like, with heavy snowfall. Nevertheless, she came to the temple to talk. I could tell by the look on her face that she had been going through a difficult time. She told me that she had recently lost her grandfather and was devastated by the loss. It was especially difficult for her because her grandfather was in a different country, so she was not able to be with him during his last moments. She was as close, if not even closer to him than her parents, and he loved her and cared for her dearly. In her words, I was his little princess. I had never witnessed anyone mourn so intensely over the loss of a grandparent. While talking about him, she would get teary-eyed and needed to take breaks so she could regain her composure. All she could talk about was how much he cared for her and for everyone in their family, even if the family members didn't reciprocate his affection or were hurtful towards him. He was selfless. Not only that, he was incredibly spiritual. Her grandfather was born in India, but had migrated to New Zealand in his youth. He developed a very successful business there and had become a prominent member of the community, known for his generosity. Before his death, he went to India and organized an eye surgery camp in the Gujarat region, where over 1,000 poor people had the opportunity to repair their eyesight. Afterward, he told his nephew, "My soul can now rest in peace." Around 5 a.m., a week after the camp was over, his wife saw him sitting on the living room sofa on her way out for a walk. He was wearing a new set of clothes and had the Bhagavad Gita in his lap, his head hanging down. He never put on fresh clothes that early in the morning. Somehow he knew this would be his last night. The Gita explains, whatever one thinks of at the time of death, that state one will attain. Even though he had achieved tremendous material success and prestige in his lifetime, he had made sure that he not only knew how to live in this world, but also how to leave it. So, this is very personal. I took the permission of the person, obviously, to see if I could include this. And she was really moved that I wanted to put the story in the book. And I felt it especially relevant because her grandfather, who in New Zealand is very influential, very wealthy, but at the same time incredibly selfless and very spiritual. He wanted to die in India. And after doing this eye surgery camp, that's when he passed away at 5 a.m., reading the Bhagavad Gita, after putting on a fresh set of clothes. So it's incredibly powerful that he kind of had an idea that he was going to go. So, and this is, of course, one of the main teachings that influenced me very deeply when I was exploring the Bhagavad Gita, was the idea about the difference between who we think we are and who we actually are. The Bhagavad Gita is explaining that there is this material body, but deeper than the body, there's actually residing the spirit soul. And the soul is actually the person who's driving this body, just like a driver in a car. The Bhagavad Gita explains that this body is very much like a vehicle. It's like a car, and it's being driven by the soul. And at the time of death, that driver gets out of the vehicle and goes on to another vehicle. The driver does not die when the vehicle stops functioning. When I first read this, I have to say that it made my head spin. Because everything that I had been taught by society and culture about myself was that you are what you see in the mirror. That's everything. That is all of you. And you identify with that skin color, with that religion, with that nationality, with that ethnicity. Now the Bhagavad Gita is saying, oh, that's all just temporary set of clothing and you're going to discard all of that at one point and get a new set. So that really, those teachings had a very deep impact on me and very deep influence on me. And they continue to influence me. If I sit and really meditate on that, it can make your head spin, but it's a beautiful teaching because it helps us understand who we are. And unless we can understand who we are, I think the real purpose of life will always be evading us.
I remember that leading up to this talk, Pandit and I were talking and we were saying, okay, we were going over the program and we thought about the questioning section, and we really want to invite you to ask the questions that you really want to ask Pandit, and feel free to really explore. So you don't have to ask just surface questions to be polite, but you can ask those deeper questions that are meaningful to you. And I think one of them I could start off with and then open it up to everybody else is I've always been curious, as a monk. I guess my question was, when you began when you were first a monk, like what were some of your greatest challenges? And then I was also curious now, what are some of your greatest challenges? So I'll start with that question, and then maybe we can open it up to all of you. So if you can think of them while he's responding.
Sarah got right into it. So, I didn't really plan when I first went to India. I didn't plan to become a monk. Actually, it was a retreat. You take a sabbatical. That's what it was. I just went on a 1-month-long retreat 14 years ago. And so I didn't expect that it was going to turn into a lifestyle, or it was going to turn into something this extended. So I was never really prepared for being there, or just that I'm going to continue. I spent from 1 month turned to 6 months. And then my visa ran out in India, so I came back to the U.S. and moved into the Manhattan Monastery. Thought, okay, maybe just another few more months, and then, I'll go back and get a job and continue life the way everyone does. So I think the biggest challenges were, and this was the first time I was living with other people, because monks mean communal setting. You have sleeping bags, and you're like, a few feet apart from each other. And there's one bathroom, and you're all waiting in line, and, not having any siblings. And for the most part, like I read, I never had to wait in line for many things, especially at home. And if you're an only child, you kind of have a reputation for being a little spoiled, so I think I probably had a little bit of that. And of course, if you're an only child, you always deny that you were spoiled. That's always a given, But, so I think that was a little challenging, living with other people, having to share space with other people. And these weren't like siblings. These were just like grown men who were coming from, and they weren't all like Indian and Hindus. There, some people were like, this was a Hindu monastery, especially when I was in Manhattan, and people from Western backgrounds were there. So it's people from, one guy was from Maine, one from like New Jersey, one from California. So I was living with grown men who had different religions in the past, who now are becoming Hindus, and had very different upbringings. They were all raised differently. So that was a challenge. And of course, back then, I think, and it continues, that's kind of always a little challenge, You've got to go to the bathroom, someone's in there. What are you going to do, That's always a challenge. And because it is, in one sense, you're going against the grain so much, every day, it's like, you're walking this way and everyone else is going this way. So you do think, and I did used to think, and sometimes the thought still goes through my mind, can I really do this for the rest of my life? Can I really do this for the rest of my life, or not? So that thought or idea, sometimes you think of a monk, and you think that, okay, it's a lifelong commitment and that's it. They probably don't think of anything other than meditating. Their minds are still like a flame of a candle and it never moves. Sorry to disappoint you, your Hollywood imagery of a monk. But that's, there was one chapter, but I didn't entitle that, but I was going to call it Monks or People Too. Maybe that's going to be the next one. But so that was a concern before, and sometimes the concern remains. Is just the number of people that you're living with. It's not that many, but still. And just also, can I do this till I die? Yeah, that's a question that goes through the mind of not just myself and other monks that I've interacted with. So, initially it happened a lot more when I was kind of a monk in training. You're out there teaching your thing, and you just expect people to kind of, jump on board and accept what you're saying and go right along. And then all of a sudden, this person throws a curveball at you. You're like, wait a second, I thought they were just going to kind of agree with me. So naturally, that was there more and more. And I think just being in the environment at Columbia University, gradually I've learned and grown and become much more open to what other people have to say and other people's worldviews, religious views, lifestyles, choices, and everything. I think it's been a growing and maturing process for myself that gradually I've come to a point where I'm much more accepting of who people are and where they're at and what they choose to believe and how they choose to live their lives. I try not to get into those situations, but there was a situation where one person, I had a table set up with some books, and one Christian gentleman came up to me and decided to tell me that, he thought that Christ was the only way. And, he kept insisting. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I appreciate what you believe, but, I don't fully accept what you're saying, and can we just call it quits? And then the next day he came back again, because he knew where I was. He knew where to find me, like a target. And then I said, I think it's important that you respect me for who I am, and I respect for you for who you are. And it would be nice if we could see each other on the street and smile. The only way that can happen is if we discontinue our conversation right now. So I kind of ended that particular conversation in that way. And of course, there's many other conversations, and they all go differently. Pete, yes.
So my question is about space. In a place like New York, there's a lot of people find hectic and AI. So I want to know, from your perspective, do you feel like space is something to be transcended on your spiritual journey, or is it more of find a space that strengthens your spiritual journey, or maybe something in between?
Certain things is hard to transcend, and everyone's conditioning may be different. For some of us, something may be easier to transcend. Like New York City for me was never a problem. I was born in Kanpur, India, which is industrial and busy like you can't imagine. I mean, it's just insane. It makes New York City, well, it makes Times Square look like a walk in the park. No joke. Because you're sharing the roads with scooters and taxis and cows and goats and dogs and rickshaws, It's like, so I was born kind of in that environment. Then I lived in Delhi for a couple of years. LA is also a pretty big city. So New York for me was the congestion, the crowds. I'm kind of okay with a lot of people being around me. So for me, for some of the monks, that's very difficult because they come from more really like suburban environments or more rural environments that now they're to New York. It's just like, oh my gosh. For me, it was not such a big deal. But so I don't know if that kind of answers your question.
So I guess what I'm thinking of is like, so for the monks that do struggle in New York City, would you say to them maybe they should find a different space to go on their spiritual journey? Or is it something that maybe they can turn inward to their spirituality and say, you know, you can cope with New York City if you deepen your spirituality?
Usually they find another place to go to. Because like I said, our conditioning is so deep that it's hard to just transcend these major, like if you're like 25 and you move to a monastery, you just had 25, quarter-century worth of conditioning. And you can meditate all you want, but it's going to be hard to transcend all of that. Some things, you know, it's good actually to be in somewhat of an uncomfortable environment, try to transcend and see how the space is affecting you and see how disturbed you get and really deal with that. It's also very healthy to not like run away immediately from discomfort. So I think it is healthy if they do that, but at some point they realize that, okay, I think I can serve more peacefully, I can be more productive in my service to society, to humanity, if my mind can be more peaceful. So yes, the externals do affect the internals. Yes. And then over there, then you'll be next.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, this person here and then yourself. Yes.
I wanted to just latch on to that piece that you said there at the very end, being more productive in your service. Can you talk to me about how you live your value of service in day-to-day life, and then also cultivate your own personal sense of spirituality, and how you find balance between those two?
Well, you know, we understand that it's going to be difficult for us to give to others or teach others unless we are very much rooted in our own practice. If I'm not nourishing myself every day, then I'm not really going to be able to give a whole lot to someone else. And the way we nourish ourselves is, you know, I do about 2 hours of meditation every day, usually in the morning. We have a whole worship ceremony. Our whole morning program is between 3 to 4 hours. So I like to call that as breakfast for the soul. And we feed ourselves, nourish ourselves, strengthen ourselves, and then, and only then, can we really hope to cope with the environment like New York City and the hustle and bustle, and be able to help others and not get dragged down just by the overall environment. So, did I answer your question?
Yeah, you answered how you nourish your own personal sense of spirituality, but tell me about like, what service is to you and how you live that out.
How? What service?
How do you define service for yourself?
Oh, okay. So, you know, within our tradition, monks, you know, a lot of times when we think of monks monks living in a very isolated environment. Within my specific tradition, I think also in others, it's recommended that monks spend time where they can help others. You take for yourself, but also to help others deal with things. So, for me, the last 12 years I've been at Columbia University and at New York University, and my main services have been to provide spirituality, a platform where people can come and discuss their spirituality. So as a chaplain, one of my main services is just talking to people one-on-one and listening to their challenges and difficulties and trying to provide some solutions and spiritual maybe tips on how they can, you know, better understand their mind, better understand who they are, better deal or cope with a situation that's surrounding them at that moment. And so I've been leading vegetarian cooking classes with the idea of educating people about a healthy vegetarian lifestyle. So I've been doing those for about 11 years. Meditation sessions, public Buddha discussions. So a lot of my time is spent teaching and spiritual guidance and spiritual counseling. So that for me is service for them, gaining wisdom from the text that I read, and then for me to realize that wisdom, I have to share that wisdom. And so this way, I'm not living in a bubble, but I'm also part of society and trying to help them in whatever way.
So, we know that becoming a monk, you have to be selfless and control your natural desires. But we're wondering, what about celibacy? How do you embrace it and control those versions, I guess?
There's a chapter in here called Celibacy and the City. So, well, first of all, I don't think you can ever really control those desires. I think you want to be real clear about that. You know, I think everybody has an idea, just because there's so much Hollywood that, you know, you've got to have a mind that's still. But the mind can never be still. The Bhagavad Gita says the mind is more turbulent than the raging wind. If anyone stopped to meditate, you realize that very quickly. There's a raging wind going on inside of your head. So that's something you never really conquer. I mean, you can eventually. It might take a few lifetimes. But, celibacy is never easy. It's never easy. Especially in a place like New York, which doesn't really promote that idea. If you're living on a farm or something, maybe it's a little easier. But around here, it's not. So, for me, the way I deal with it is the service that I have gives me such fulfillment that it just inspires me to keep doing what I'm doing. Getting married is always the option is there. There's no, unless you take formal vows as a monk, you can always get married. And I haven't taken those formal vows. And I've seen people make formal vows and not be able to keep them. So I'm like, well, there's no need to make them. I can stay a student monk as long as I want to. So that, so ultimately, for me, it's just I'm getting so much satisfaction in being able to help so many people. And there's so many people looking for spirituality, so many people looking to meditate and just to be able to be there, and the satisfaction of seeing them finding happiness and joy gives me a lot of satisfaction. And I'm just not ready to sacrifice that. Okay, I think I need help pointing out who's raising their hand, because I don't want somebody getting frustrated that, hey, I've raised my hand so many times.
I was wondering if you could talk more about your spirituality and some of the central values that drive your everyday life.
Okay.
Do you mind repeating the question?
So to talk about my spirituality and the values that drive, basically the teachings, right? The main teachings within my tradition. But one of the main teachings that I practice and that I teach is the practice of mantra meditation. And we've led some meditation sessions here at TC in the past, and for several years actually. And I've been doing mantra meditation for about 15 years now. So it's the idea of really nourishing the mind so the mind can become your friend. The Bhagavad Gita says an uncontrolled mind can become one's worst enemy, and a properly nourished mind can become one's best friend. And I think we've all experienced how the mind has a tendency to dwell on the negativities of life. It's expert at pulling up stuff from years ago and decades ago, and just thinking about it 10 minutes later, you're like, why did I do that? What was the point in that? And you just worked yourself up and got all angry and got your blood pressure up and everything. Like that was over and done with. So the mind, unfortunately right now, is kind of our worst enemy, because it's like the raging wind in there. So one of the central practices for us is chanting mantras. And for me, it's the Hare Krishna mantra. And the idea is that by chanting audibly mantra, and mantra are names of the divine, names of God, the soul and the mind are having union with God. And that union between the soul and God is actually called yoga. So yoga isn't just about turning yourself into a pretzel. It's really being able to connect with God. That's really what the meaning of yoga is. And so you can call it mantra yoga. So the word mantra means sacred sounds. So this is the main practice that will, according to our theology, will help us by chanting the mantra and hearing the mantra and letting our mind and soul connect with the mantra. We understand that it will help us eventually remove things like envy and greed and pride and anger. Gradually, it will weed these things out from the heart. And once these things, gradually as they go, the mind becomes more tame, more calm, and cooperates with us and works with us to achieve our spiritual goal. There's a lot more, but that's, I can say, the main.
You talked about the body being the vehicle for the soul, and you talked about it in relation to death, but what kind of guidance do you give for, particularly perhaps young people who feel that their body is kind of the core of who they are, that they don't have that attachment to the soul? How do you guide them to overcome that?
Usually, young people won't come up to me and ask me very deep spiritual questions. It's more about other things happening in their life, But the way to address that is that, even though it's a vehicle, it is a vehicle, and we have to take care of it. But it's not the all in all. that you can take care of the vehicle, but if you don't feed the driver, then ultimately the vehicle is also going to not go in the right direction. So I try to kind of encourage that, do both. You know, we have to. I mean, we'll do that. We'll take care of the we're expert at taking care of the externals. I spent hours in front of the mirror just making sure every last strand of hair is exactly where it's supposed to be. But also now, you know, I just encourage them to also nourish the soul through meditation. Like incorporate that into your everyday life. Somehow 5 minutes, 10 minutes, it doesn't have to be 2 hours. It could be whatever you want. And then if the mind is healthy, it'll actually help you become more peaceful, which will help you in your relationships. If your mind is nourished, you can be more productive in your academic work, and that's true. You can do all of that. So, you know, by encouraging spiritual practices, which automatically nourish the soul, but they also nourish our body and mind. That's kind of how I encourage the youth to balance both.
Time for one more question.
Do you feel like your journey has enhanced your capacity to love?
Do I feel like my journey has enhanced my capacity to love? It has definitely opened me up a lot more and has allowed me to appreciate to a much greater degree people's differences and appreciate how people are different from me and appreciate their spiritual practices and lifestyles. So I think appreciation is a beginning point of love. Loving others, you know, is if you really try to understand what love means, I think that's a very deep and big word. Like love, like really love. Like who can we say that we love and will do anything for, even sacrifice our life? So I would say that my spiritual practice definitely helped me appreciate people a lot more. And I'm working on the love. They say that the Bhagavad Gita explains that one who's actually transcended, achieved spiritual success, they can love everybody equally because they see everybody with equal vision. That means whether it's an animal or whether it's a human being, they actually feel, because now they're actually loving the soul within that body. They're no longer seeing, you know, our appreciation and love for someone sometimes is disrupted by maybe somebody, the way somebody looks, the way they behave, the way they talk, or this and that. We make so many judgments, so quickly we judge people and put them in boxes, you know. We do that all day long, right? But a self-realized soul, an actualized soul, is actually seeing the soul inside. And even if that person has hurt them in some way, they don't really hate that person. They realize that some conditioning making them act this way. But they can actually feel love for that individual or anybody. And so I think that'll probably take me another couple of lifetimes. But I think with each day of practice, hopefully I move, you know, a step closer or half a step closer. Thank you very much.